When NFL free agency starts next week, every team's fan base will inevitably go to Twitter and start talking about how their team should spend a lot of money on the offensive line as a quick fix to every one of their life's problems. But what if, in reality, Big NFL is hiding the real secret from you? What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Tinfoil Helmet. I am Kevin Fielder. I'm joined today by Tyler DeSena. Tyler, when we were starting this podcast, we had this idea of framing every one of these as a quote unquote theory, right? Like a conspiracy theory. And you brought up one that was interesting because it's something that talked about, and I think we both thought about as Dolphins fans. Uh, I think we're titling this the offensive line theory. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to explain this because you were the one who came up with this. You get all the credit for this first episode because I would have never actually been able to put this into words.
Well, I think the idea of it is the quantity over quality method of going after offensive linemen, especially in free agency. The idea that if you can just throw five bodies up there who are NFL caliber, it doesn't really matter who the highest paid one is, who the best one is. It's more about just having guys who are physically capable of making plays and are physically capable of being NFL caliber linemen rather than spending a ton of money. And we have evidence that backs that offensive line spending versus the average does not necessarily correlate to Super Bowls.
So last year, pretty historically, or pretty crazily enough, I think it was the Carolina Panthers who just decided that they needed to have a spending spree on only interior offensive linemen. They signed Robert Hunt to this insane contract that, look, Robert Hunt is a very good football player, but I don't think he's worth the 100 or so million that they gave him on the open market. Then they signed another one who's great podcasting here. I already forgot the name of. He's a good football player, but Damian Lewis.
Damian Lewis.
Yeah, they spent Damian Lewis this season will get paid $14 million. Robert Hunt will get paid $21 million. And I just found this out. Taylor Morton will account for the most against their cap space next year with $31 million against the cap. So quick math tells me that those three players are accounting for about 68% or $68 million against your cap by themselves. And
It,
I don't think I don't think I speak for any of us when I say, "Wow, the Carolina Panthers are not a good football team. They're fun. Don't get me wrong. I love Bryce Young. I think Dave Canales is doing a great job there, but they are not a good football team yet. And it is kind of crazy that they are spending that much money on offensive linemen compared to some of the league's best offensive line. And I think there's probably no better place to start than maybe the poster child for everything that we're going to talk about on this episode, the Philadelphia Eagles, who this season or last season were 13th in offensive line spending, uh, which makes them about league average. And yet they won the Super Bowl with, can we say, a top three offensive line?
yeah. I mean, and it wasn't as much about hey, like you said, because of the fact that they're right around average, it wasn't about, oh, here's the top end talent we have on the offensive line. They lose Jason Kelsey, who's the best, one of the best centers of all time, and then they go out and win the Super Bowl with guys like Mekhi Becton at right guard, who's not some elite player, but again, it kind of fits the theory that if you can just get NFL caliber starters in the door, you don't have to spend that much money. Like I think we're trending to a point where if you see a guy like a Robert Hunt hit the open market where he's like 25 years old at the time and a really good football player, you're going to end up going broke if you're the team that signs him just based on the fact that you're giving him a ton of money that in a vacuum he's probably worth. But when you compare it to the rest of your cap and the players that you need to sign, the positional value just no longer exists.
I've looked this up now. Shout out over the cap. I've sorted this by every single position or every single position along the offensive line. They categorize it by left tackle, left guard, right tackle. The Eagles have Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata, and they neither of them are top five in offensive line contracts. And you mentioned Mekhi Becton. And before we get any further, we do need to mention that no team besides the Eagles have Jeff Southland. So you are not recreating this perfectly. But I do think it's interesting when you look at a team like Philadelphia, who trusts their development, who trusts their ability to create offensive linemen based on talent, based on skill set, based on traits, and put them within the system and build the system around those guys. Because truth be told, Mekhi Becton's career was dead before he arrived in Philadelphia. And a year ago, right? Like we were all talking about this guy being one of the biggest draft busts by the Jets, which, if you know anything about the Jets drafting history, they've only drafted draft busts, it seems like. And so, like, the fact that he is now turned into, I think he's going to get paid this offseason, whether it be by Philadelphia and they are in a position where they can sort of pay offensive linemen now, or by another team, he's going to get a pretty good contract. And a year ago, it seemed like his career was not over, but very much on the rails. And before we started this and we were doing our research, I had mentioned that the Baltimore Ravens were even lower on this positional spending from last season, 2024. They were 18th in the NFL in offensive line spending. And Tyler, you mentioned that you thought they were the best offensive line at points last season. And then I sort of went back and thought about it, and I went, yeah, you're not wrong. That offensive line was pretty dang good, and they didn't have anyone highly paid.
Yeah, like Ronnie Stanley obviously is a name that you look at and you see like, hey, that's a highly touted, highly paid offensive lineman. But then aside from him and Linderbaum, who's on a rookie deal, Patrick McCarry, Daniel Falele, Roger Rosengarten, like these are not guys who are top of the line at their positions. They're just guys who are like good NFL caliber offensive linemen. And that's genuinely like what the basis of this theory is that it's more so about trying to find value over the margins than it is getting the best players in the door like so many teams are trying to do right now. The Panthers.
And interestingly enough, I went back since 2016, and I don't know why I chose 2016. I think I did it because that was the year where the Eagles drafted Carson Wentz, and I thought that was a really funny place to start this. The Eagles have drafted 5 offensive linemen in the first 2 days. The Ravens have drafted 6. They clearly prioritize drafting offensive linemen. And no surprise, like the names that you named off, most of those were homegrown players produced by their system for their system. And then you look at a team like the Panthers, and I don't want to keep the Panthers as the punching bag, but you look at a team like the Panthers because they were the team that spent a lot of money on offensive linemen last year. And so, first of all, right, like the Panthers were in a position where they could spend a lot of money on the offensive line because they had a ton of holes and they had a ton of money. When you are in that situation, you spend money. And so they got 2 good offensive linemen, right? Like, I don't want anyone to think that we don't think Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis are good football players.
I think Robert Hunt's a fantastic football player.
I think Robert Hunt is a fantastic football player as well. But like when you look at spending, I don't know if he's worth 20 million.
Yeah.
I very much question if he's worth 20 million.
And this is where we kind of frame it as a conspiracy because it's like the NFL and the players want these guys to get paid when they hit free agency. They do, because that's like where their value is dictated at. That's where we believe how much we believe they're going to get paid. And with offensive linemen, we don't see that many highly touted ones hit free agency, especially as young as a player like Robert Hunt. So it was kind of unprecedented what kind of contract he could get on the interior. And then you see by the time that comes through, it's like a 5-year, $100 million contract. And I think we're kind of reaching a point where now you're looking at this year and there's a lot of offensive linemen who are on the market, but nobody who's kind of in the Robert Hunt caliber of player. So you might, but like, is a team going to go out and find, the youngest guy available, somebody who's 25, 26 years old, and go spend 80 to $100 million on him? It's possible. Like, there were a lot of interior offensive linemen last year, like Jonah Jackson, who just got traded, who got paid. And it's kind of funny that like the ideology is you have these young guys and they're going to get paid once they hit free agency, but it's kind of reached the point, at least we're predicting it to, with like where running backs were at a couple of years ago, where it's like you better get the money while you still can, because maybe it just might run out if teams keep saying, hey, we're going to dedicate 5 to 10% of the cap to one interior offensive lineman.
This reminds me a lot of that one year in the NFL or the NBA, excuse me, where this is not an NBA podcast, but the one year in the NBA where every team just spent money and they were giving Tiago Splitter like $80 million. No, it was Timothy Mozgov. They gave like $80 million to.
Mm-hmm.
They gave Luol Deng the entire GDP of a small country to play basketball for the Lakers, right? And like none of these contracts hit. Shockingly, when you pay Luol Deng $30 million a year or whatever it was, it doesn't hit. Now, I don't think we're going to get to that point where we're giving $30 billion to the football equivalent of Luol Deng. I'll let everyone else come to those conclusions as to who that would be. But like, I'm looking at this free agency class right now for offensive linemen, and Trey Smith got franchise tagged, and it appears that he's going to stay an extra year with Kansas City. So he's the biggest name off the board. The franchise tag is about $23 million this year.
Yeah. And just for reference, by the way, that NBA offseason you're talking about is 2016.
I thought it was 2016.
And I found some of the contracts, and it's just, it kind of does feel like the NFL just had, because the reason that happened was because of a new collective bargaining agreement where the cap went up a whole crazy amount, and they're like, wow, it's just going to go up forever. And we just saw the cap number in the NFL go up substantially, like year after year. And that's why you saw contracts in the NBA like 5 years, 120 for Nicholas Batum, 4 years, 98.5 for Chandler Parsons.
Sure.
4 years, 70 for Ken Bazemore. 4 years, 80 for Ryan Anderson. 4 years, 72 million for Bismack Biyombo. I know there's a crazy Tyler Johnson 4 years.
Yeah, Tyler Johnson got offered that contract by the Nets, and the Heat felt pressure, and they felt like they had to match that contract. They were like, wow, he's too good that we have to match him.
Mirza Teletovic, 3 years, 30 million. That money, NBA money's crazy, but I think what our point was, like, we just saw the NFL cap number go up like another 20
Yeah,
million.
I'm very afraid of, like, when I look at some of these guys, and I'm looking and trying to think of the guys who would get the big contracts this year, because there's not a Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt was a genuinely good starting offensive lineman for a solid football team with the
And
Dolphins.
fantastic when healthy.
Yes, fantastic when
last year, I
healthy.
think he missed a handful of games for Miami.
But like we
then-
were talking about a Pro Bowl caliber right guard,
Yeah.
which don't come around often. Trey Smith was going to be the guy this year, and he got franchise tagged because he's so good.
And
But
Trey Smith is even a higher touted player.
Trey Smith is better, yes.
Yeah,
But like
for sure.
I'm looking at the list of guys who I think could get paid this year, and like the name that sticks out to me because he's 27 years old, Tevin Jenkins feels like a guy who's going to get paid a lot
That's
by
exactly
an NFL
where
team.
I was thinking.
Because he was a highly touted draft pick. I think he was a really early second round pick by the Chicago Bears. They started at left tackle, didn't really work out, has had injury problems, but he's found a home as an offensive guard. And now, man, 27 years old, he's one of the younger offensive linemen on the market. He played 65, percent of the snaps for the Bears last year. This feels like a guy who's going to get paid by a team.
It feels like you're looking at a contract that's going to reach north of $15 million. And it's just,
it would not shock me.
And not at all. And like you're looking at some of the other like young guys that are kind of sitting there. Like you take a look at Josh Myers in Green Bay, who's apparently an unrestricted free agent at 27. You look at Drew Dahlman, who's played some snaps in Atlanta. Like there are a lot of guys who are
Look
like
at Aaron Banks from San
Aaron
Francisco.
Banks is how old? I mean,
28 years old.
Yeah.
Played 71% of the snaps. Was good at the snaps. I went back and watched him a few days ago. I thought he was a good football player. He might be the highest paid offensive lineman out of this class. And I don't think we have a market resetter in this class. But like, I even look at a guy who's 30 years old, but just got done playing a lot of snaps for 2 straight teams with Cam Robinson in Minnesota and Jacksonville. A left tackle who's hitting the market as a solid average starter. it feels like a team's going to offer him actual money.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's that good. Like, I think he's good, not that good. But like, man, it feels like he's going to get paid a lot of money. And so, Tyler, I want to shift this to like, how much of this is, because this is where my mind goes on this. How much of this is GMs of teams that are average to like slightly below average who aren't top tier contenders in the NFL? We'll talk like the Ravens, Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, although the Chiefs were pretty high in offensive line spending. Uh, how much of this is teams thinking that they have to upgrade the offensive line across the board to protect their franchise quarterback when I wonder if, truth be told, that money should go to other places?
I think we've reached the point where acquire offensive linemen is like the new throw the bomb. Like where it's the thing that everyone says, like sign big guys up front. We need offensive linemen. It's the thing that everyone that doesn't really know what they're talking about in football, that is a fan that can get upset, like says about how to fix your team. It's like I remember when I was watching the early like 2010s Dolphins, the first thing that you hear every game is they need to throw the bomb more. And it's like they were like the use of the terminology, the word bomb over and over again, like for deep passes. Like that was what every white man in his 40s was saying about down the field passing attacks. Now that the NFL offseason has become such a big event, especially the draft, which now kind of extends in a free agency because you see which guys are going to sign where, how much money they're going to spend. We've gotten to the point where it's kind of become the new throw the bomb. Like it's just, hey, throw money on the guys up front. And I think owners hear that and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And now seeing the Eagles go out and win a Super Bowl where they have, like, I know we said not a high spent O line, but an offensive line with a lot of talented pieces, and people are so willing to talk about how good guys like Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens and Mekhi Becton was down the stretch and Jordan Mailata, and we're talking about how good these guys are. I think you're in a position where a lot of owners are going to put pressure on their coaches, on their GMs to say, hey, if we're going to be competitive, we're going to have a potential to win 8 games. I think the quickest way to that is to go, fix the offensive line. And that's going to cause, a lot of teams hemorrhaging their cap situation just to go out and get somebody who could be really good, but could prevent you from adding, generational talent elsewhere, which we have seen in the past has been the quickest way to, rebuild a team is to get a quarterback that can, change the pathway. But, that's not as attainable as some people think.
I think the most interesting part of this is that it has also shifted into how fans discuss team building. And I don't blame a fan for doing this. Let's be clear. I was at this point once where I was just like, dude, F it. Dolphins spend as much money on offensive linemen. We need to fix the problem. And then I went back and I thought about it, and like, I don't think the Dolphins' offensive line was good last year. I don't think there's anyone
Well,
who's
not
going to
obviously.
agree that the offensive line was good last year.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the offensive line, when they had Armstead healthy, when it was Armstead, Robert Jones, Aaron Brewer, Liam Eichenberg, and Austin Jackson, I thought that offensive line played well. Like, I don't think that was a good offensive line by any stretch, but I think that was a good enough offensive line to win you football games. And I would argue that offensive line, if all of them hit the open market at once, 3 of them would be highly pursued after players. Those being Austin Jackson, Brewer, and Armstead. But like, I think that a lot of this is like, you just can't have an offensive lineman who, and Tyler, I want to know if you agree or disagree with this. Is like, is this a fact where it's like you just can't have an offensive lineman who's really bad? If you
No,
have
that's
5 offensive linemen who are just average, who are just good enough, and you have good coaching and you have other pieces around them on offense, you can win football games with those 5 offensive linemen.
Oh yeah, no, that's where this theory started. I mean, like that's where it kind of came and was like birthed, like in my brain was the idea that I've watched the Dolphins year after year have 1 to 2 guys who are below average to like almost, bench level players, and you're watching them play, and it drags down the performance of when you have, when the Dolphins had Teron Armstead, Liam Eichenberg at left guard, but then Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, Austin Jackson. That's 4 good offensive linemen, but the left guard is so bad that you don't have an interior. Like you don't have an offensive line going up the middle. And like another team that kind of shows the inverse of this is look at what the Commanders did this past season. They didn't go out and sign anybody special, but they paid value contracts to guys who are league average to slightly above league average, got a good quarterback behind them, and sprayed the ball out to receiving weapons, and they made the NFC Championship game. Like it's not. They don't. I don't think the Commanders have any offensive linemen where you're like, wow, that's a Teron Armstead level guy. But they don't also don't have anyone on that line that you're like, hey, that's a Liam Eichenberg level guy.
The Commanders, I don't have the actual number here, but I want to name some of the teams above them. And Tyler, I want you to tell me if these are good offensive lines or bad offensive lines. Above the Commanders, the New England Patriots
Horrendous.
spent more money on offensive linemen than the Washington Commanders. The Arizona Cardinals,
There were times where they looked solid overall.
they
They're not
were,
a good.
I would say, average.
Yeah, they were fine, but they weren't good.
The Raiders,
I mean, like again, with a real life coaching staff that wasn't made up of fictional characters, I think they could have been
good,
a
but
good
they were not
offensive
good
team,
last year.
but they were not. I 100% agree.
And
But
then
they also
finally,
didn't have a real coaching staff. That doesn't.
three more, the Saints.
I mean, I think we know the answer to that one.
Yes,
Awful.
I just wanted to mention them. And then two teams that I thought had good offensive lines last year, but very similarly aren't spending a lot of money on them in 2024, the Cowboys and the Chargers.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to like coaching matters because I thought that the Chargers knew what they had and they knew how to maximize what they had.
Yeah.
And they had obviously they had an awesome quarterback in Justin Herbert. I know there may be Dolphins fans who go, "Well, Tua is bad." I don't care. I don't care if you think Tua is better. I don't really care. Justin Herbert is a terrific quarterback. Same with Jaden
Very,
Daniels.
very good player, and that's
Same
all you
with
can really say.
same with Dak Prescott, right? Like these teams have good quarterbacks to bridge the gap. And Tyler, when we started this, you mentioned that there's some historical data to back this up, and you found this through Over the Cap. And so I want you to start, and then I'll just chime in when I feel like it's necessary.
Yeah, no, there's this over the cap graph that I'll probably in post production put on screen at some point. But it shows where teams rank in terms of how much they've spent at every position versus league average dating back to 2013. It doesn't have the most recent Super Bowl teams, but every other team that's been in the Super Bowl between 2024 Super Bowl and 2013 Super Bowl, it has all of them. And when you look at the teams that are the perennial contenders, the ones who are, year in and year out playing spectacular football and are making the Super Bowl. You look at teams like the San Francisco 49ers of the 23-24 season. They spent 46.7% less than the average team on the interior offensive line. You look at the Eagles the year before, or no, you look at the Chiefs the year before that, the team that won the Super Bowl in 2022 after revamping their line because they got stomped by Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. That team revamped their offensive line, but they were still below average in paying their tackles and their interior offensive linemen. And this keeps going. The Rams, below average at tackle, well below average on the interior of the offensive line. You look at the Bucks, they're kind of an outlier. They spent a lot more on that interior, but they had late stage career Tom Brady and also like they could not afford to get a lick of pressure up the middle or else their quarterback would evaporate. But the other teams, 2019 Chiefs, well below average at an interior offensive line. 2018 Patriots, well below average interior offensive line. 2016 Patriots, well below average interior offensive line. A lot of these teams have the ability to not just because of the fact that they can get 5 real bodies out there, 5 NFL caliber players on the field, and especially through hitting in the draft, that they don't have to go out there and spend an excess amount of money. Like when you look at this list and see some of these teams that are well over this number that end up losing Super Bowls, or the teams we just talked about, like the Colts and Panthers, who are nowhere near Super Bowls, but are spending just an exorbitant amount of money on these positions.
And the interesting one, and this one is shocking to me because I remember this discussion that we had when the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl to the Buccaneers, and we
That's the
all knew
big one.
that the problem was the offensive line. And we all said, and I think I was a part of this. Like, I'm not even going to sit here and try and say like I wasn't a part of this conversation. I sat there and said, yeah, they need to upgrade the offensive line. They need to spend money on offensive linemen. They need to have serious offensive linemen because I equated spending money to fixing the problem. The Chiefs in 2020 spent 40% below average on the interior offensive line. They increased that number to 5.8% below average. So they were still below average in spending on the offensive line.
And that was from bringing in Tooney and Creed Humphrey. And I think getting Trey Smith back healthy, because I think he wasn't healthy at that point. But if you want to like keep looking at weakest link and how that's affecting teams, look at the Kansas City Chiefs this year. They still have had all three of those guys. And then you're looking at their left tackle situation / left guard, and they're playing Mike Caliendo, who I didn't know existed before the Super Bowl.
That guy sounds
So
like a mafia member. That guy actually sounds like a mafia member.
I just think of Frank Caliendo, the impression guy. But
maybe this guy is the impression guy.
Maybe it is Frank Caliendo impressioning his way onto an offensive line.
I just looked it up, and the first photo of Mike Caliendo on Google is him stretching, looking like he's about to take a crap. I feel like we may need to
that is
impose
an
this.
insane photo.
We may need to impose this also on post production if we remember to do so. But like,
I'm saving it to my computer right now.
But like, I think that you look at this, and it is so interesting that the teams that are good at football, and this is not shocking. Like, we're not reinventing the wheel by telling you that you need a good quarterback to win a Super Bowl. Like, this is not newfound information. But it is very interesting that you don't need a good offensive line, in the sense of you don't need to spend a lot of money to fix the problem. And like, just thinking off the top of my head, a lot of the teams that won the Super Bowl in this stretch had good offensive line coaches who understood what was necessary, and they had great offensive coordinators. Like Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, whoever was calling that offense that year. I think it was more so Reid. You look at like the Buccaneers, who had Byron Leftwich and Tom Brady. Whoever ran that offense, your guess is as good as mine sometimes. The Rams in 2021 were an incredibly well-built offense.
Yeah,
they just didn't.
Potentially, there's a reason they're the only team besides this Eagles team that has won. Like the only other two teams that have won since Patrick Mahomes has entered the NFL and started his tear are a team led by Tom Brady and this Eagles team that might have the greatest roster ever assembled.
And Jalen Hurts with the greatest offensive line coach of all time.
Yeah,
much to consider.
And like, then you look at the Rams and you're like, they're not on the roster or quarterback level of either of those teams, respectively. And they won a Super Bowl because of the fact that they had a coach who went berserk.
And they spent negative 68.1% on interior offensive linemen, compared to league average. Very interesting there. And so, Tyler, I want to ask this. Do we think this is an offensive tackle and offensive guard problem? Or is this a problem, a situation that is more so just to the interior offensive line? Because I know some coaches will tell you, and Mike McDaniel is someone who subscribes to this thought process, that the interior of an offensive line is easier to fix than a left tackle or a right tackle. We can find solid offensive guards for cheap. We can't find solid offensive tackles for cheap. Is this a problem that extends across the board, or is it focused on one position?
I think it could be across the board. I think that obviously I think there's still value in the NFL at having a bookend tackle. But I think genuinely, like, I think if you look at some of these tackles in the way that we haven't really seen a lot of young tackles hit free agency as of late who are going to get bags, but now we're kind of coming up on it with Darisaw and Rashawn Slater. And there's just a lot more young tackles now that are on the verge of getting paid that I think you could see teams like the Chargers get a little hamstrung in the fact that they're now going to have to pay Rashawn Slater probably upwards of 28 to $30 million a year. Like, he's going to be commanding top tier edge money as an offensive tackle. And I think we're just at the point where we have to look at the we have to look at places where you can cut costs if you're going to have a max contract quarterback. Like, and that is, everyone talks about the, like you were mentioning, the rookie deal thing where we all want quarterbacks on rookie deals. But I think we kind of factor in the idea that we have to be paying the offensive line some crazy amount of money on top of that quarterback. And in reality, with the money in the cap continually going up, I think you're going to start getting more value out of those $50+ million quarterback deals than you are out of $30 million tackle deals or paying two tackles north of 50 million plus.
This reminds me of Tyler. I'm going to tell you this meme, and you're going to go, why is this the first thing that pops into your mind? But it's the food $200, data $150, rent $800, candles $3600, utility $150. Someone who is good at the economy, please help me budget this. My family is dying. It is effectively like, someone help me budget this. My football team
My
is dying.
offense is dying.
Yeah, my offense is dying, and I'm spending $40 million combined on the interior offensive line. Uh, man, I am of the belief, I think, and this is something that I've thought for a while, and I don't now necessarily disagree with it. If you're going to spend money on the offensive line, and that is absolutely a thing that you should do at some point if you have good offensive linemen, I am of the belief that they should be left tackle, right tackle. You should prioritize left tackle because it's the blind side of your quarterback.
Agreed.
If your quarterback is getting hit, you're done. And you look at like the Eagles, Jordan Mailata gets paid a lot of money because he's so good at being the left tackle. And then right tackle, if you have a really good right tackle, I am not going to sit here and say you cannot pay Penei Sewell a lot of money, because I would pay Penei Sewell a lot of money.
And the
But
Lions did, and they're a well-constructed team. Like,
yes, the Lions have two high-paid tackles. They have Taylor Decker and they have Penei Sewell.
but they're about to let Zeitler go. Was it Zeitler on the interior? They had
Zeitler's on the interior. They've got a
yeah,
few guys on the interior that I think they can let go, and they feel pretty confident in, I think,
their
addressing that.
ability to rebuild those
I
trenches
mean,
because
they
they
let
have
Jonah Jackson
outstanding
walk.
offensive line coaching.
They let Jonah Jackson walk. We talked about Jonah Jackson earlier this episode. They let Jonah Jackson walk.
Which
He
that
signed,
contract is another one that's insane.
yes, he signed an insane contract with
3
the
years,
Rams.
51 million,
And after
17
1
year.
year, he is back on the move, rejoining with Ben Johnson in Chicago. I think that's going to be a good move for them in the long term,
Me
or in
too.
the short term. But like,
They also have the money to spend.
yes, they are again one of these teams that, like, much like the Panthers, probably have the money where you can get away with it in the short term. Caleb Williams is on a very team-friendly contract. He's one of these rookie contracts, and so if you're going to try and spend money around that contract, the easiest way to do it is to go get offensive linemen who are familiar with your system. But I think
I
The Colts spending the most money in the NFL on the offensive line last year, and they had problems across the board. And they're not a team that is with money to spend just figuring it out. And I know that Anthony Richardson is on a rookie deal, but like, they may be on the market for a quarterback this year or next year, because Anthony Richardson has not looked like an NFL quarterback. And that has nothing to do with the offensive line, but you look at some of the defense as well. Man, that defense looked lackluster for a team that was expected to compete for a playoff spot. And that's because so much of that money was going to offensive linemen who were good, maybe not great, when they could have used that money to fill extra holes.
Yeah. And I think we're at the point where I think your money should just, besides the fact I think left tackle and right tackle, like you said, are the exceptions to this rule. But when it comes to the interior of the offensive line specifically, the idea of paying somebody $22 million, I think we're at the point where we talk about wanting a quarterback on a rookie deal, wanting corners when they're young and not overpaying, or receivers. I think your highest paid players should be the guys who can break a game, not necessarily your best players.
I
And
agree there.
I think that that's why we saw Saquon Barkley go nuts and now make $20 million. Is you saw an Eagles team that was 13th in offensive line spending, had a good enough offensive line that became great down the stretch, and all of a sudden you have a guy in Saquon Barkley you are now enabling through a decent to very good offensive line over time. You are enabling him to break the game. You are allowing him to break the game, and that is why he's now worth $20 million. Saquon Barkley wasn't worth $20 million to the New York Giants because he couldn't break a game for them. But guys like, Justin Jefferson, I'd much rather pay Justin Jefferson $40 million than pay a three interior offensive linemen 60 or 50. Like,
And I
and
think you
that's
look.
because it's a guy who can at any point take over a game. And I think on the offensive line, honestly, to be a competitive team, it's not about taking over a game from the interior. It's just about not screwing it up and not ruining the game.
I think the thing that I've always said about the Dolphins offensive line in particular, but it's the same about any offensive line. If I don't hear your name, you're doing a good job. If I don't hear X player gave up the sack, that means you did a good job to me, man. Like, truth be told, that's good enough along the interior of an offensive line, and likely at right tackle and left tackle as well. But like, I went back and I looked at this as you were talking because I was interested in this. The Colts spent $61 million on the offensive line, or $68 million on the offensive line last year. But they were below league average on cornerback and safety. And I watched that secondary play football last year. That was bad football across the secondary. And I wonder how different that could have been. And maybe they don't make the playoffs, right? Because that was a pretty bad offense regardless. They didn't have a lot of game breakers. Jonathan
But
Taylor,
even then, they were on the verge.
they were on the verge. And I wonder how different that is if they spend that money on a good corner, if they spend that money on a good safety, if they use that money elsewhere and not just try and put all that money on the offensive line to keep Anthony Richardson healthy. Or even so, like, what if they spent that money on a game-breaking wide receiver? And I think that Alec Pierce is a good football player. I think Michael Pittman is a solid football player. I think Josh Downs is developing into a talented football player. None of those guys are game breakers yet. They're all just good football players.
You don't have to game plan around any of those players. You don't. And the thing is, I think we're at the point where you want to talk about offensive line theory and where money is going in the NFL. I think those kind of receiving cores, those are the guys that I think also might just get phased out. I think that you're looking at a receiving core where you have 3 or 4 number twos. Like, I love what Green Bay has right now because all of them are extremely young. You're not paying any of them over like $3 or $4 million, and they're all pretty good value. Like when you talk about a Romeo Doubs, a Dontavian Wicks, a Jaden Reed, I know it didn't pan out for them, but you like those because they're value and they're playing above the margins. But when all of those players are up for new contracts and all of them are $10 million plus players you're going to have to pay, you better believe Green Bay is not re-signing most of them. Like that's where it comes down to. It's like you need to be spending money at the biggest positions on it. It's better to have one guy who can break a game than 3 guys who are going to let you down when you need a game broken.
Yeah, and I think that, like, you look at some of the teams that are near the top of the NFL last year, in terms of production, in terms of play talent, like style, in terms of everything, in terms of just general offensive output. And you look at, like, outside of the Commanders, who I think are nearing that point, they acquired Debo Samuel to try and help that wide receiver room be serious because it was Terry McLaurin and a whole bunch of dudes. There was Zach Ertz, who at 35 or whatever is good, maybe not to the level of Zach Ertz from 5 years ago.
Way too good for 35, but definitely still needs help.
But you
Like,
look at the Eagles, who had and AJ Brown, who I would argue is a game breaker at wide receiver. When you need a play, AJ Brown is making a play for you. The Chiefs had Travis Kelsey, who even as he ages, still has the makings of a game breaker at tight end. You look at the Ravens, who Mark Andrews, I know we all talked about what happened with Mark Andrews. I think he's still a solid tight end.
good
I think
football player.
Zay Flowers is a good wide receiver, but you have the game breaker at running back with Derrick Henry. That's your game breaker. Your game breaker is your running back.
In your quarterback as well.
Your quarterback, yes.
Lamar's ability to, when they bite on Derrick Henry, burn you for 60.
Yes, very
Another
much
game
so.
breaker.
Like, they are in the perfect world of having both of those things that most teams just don't have. But you even look at the Lions, right, with Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who may not be to the same level of game breakers as some of these other guys, but they're still players who, like, if you need a first down, I feel confident in getting the ball to one of those guys to make a play.
Yeah, and Gibbs specifically, if he's not a game breaker already, he by year 4 or 5, he'll be the
He'll
game.
be a game breaker.
He is.
Like, he is trending
He is
in
when
that
it comes to
direction.
his speed, explosiveness, ability to get to the second level. Ben Johnson was already designing pitch plays after receivers had caught the ball to get him touchdowns. That is a guy who is explosive as all get out. That's a game breaker. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown is a game breaker in the way that he single-handedly keeps your offense on schedule. Like,
Yes, he is the perfect, just get him the ball, get him 6 yards.
he is, let's get 7 yards a catch on first down, second down, second down, and you never see third down because he's catching every ball.
I think the only team of this bunch that maybe did not reach the having a game breaker on offense outside of their quarterback is the Buffalo Bills. And they are, again, a team whose game breaker is the fact that Josh Allen, when he's
Is
not
God.
making bozo plays, can throw the ball 80 yards down the field regardless of who's down there.
When Josh Allen is not throwing a crossbody interception, which is every so often, but when
Every
Josh
game,
Allen's
let's be clear,
playing
it's every game.
when Josh Allen's playing in the postseason, like you look at postseason Josh Allen, that's what 80s and 90s football fans think Dan Marino was, adding 15 more miles per hour to his top speed. That is the game breaker. I don't think there's anyone in the NFL that you can argue is more of a game breaker than Josh Allen, just solely based on the last year of what he's had around him. Like, the Bills were almost a Super Bowl team with Josh Allen and Khalil Shakir, who I love, but again, not a
Wide
game
receiver
breaker.
too. He's a wide receiver too.
And they didn't have a one.
I love James Cook. I think James Cook is a great football player, not a game breaker. Good, solid running back, not a game breaker. The other team that we didn't mention here, but again, they're kind of a case study in this, is the Rams, who don't have a game breaker, right? Like, I don't think Puka or Cooper Kupp at his age are game breakers, but they're both players who are going to make plays for you. So,
But
like,
that's
they may
also
not be
why they
game
didn't win the
breakers.
Super Bowl.
Well, that and the fact that they played that game in a blizzard, but also,
yeah, but I'm saying that team did not have the explosiveness they didn't have the explosive play rate to really win a Super Bowl. They would have had to dink and dunk teams apart with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. They couldn't generate explosives the same way. Cooper Kupp, when he was healthy and they won that Super Bowl in 21, they were generating a ton of explosives.
And you look at who beat them in that game in the blizzard, it was the Eagles game breaker.
Yeah.
It was Saquon Barkley.
Single-handedly
Saquon Barkley,
Saquon.
he gave him the ball and he made plays. And so I want to shift this conversation as we sort of close off the offensive line theory as what is the solution? Because it feels like if we're going to talk about what teams shouldn't do, which is effectively what we've done for this entire episode, is that they shouldn't spend a lot of money on interior offensive linemen. What would you do? Let's say you took over as the GM of a team looking to make that next step. What is your solution to solving the problems that you may face, especially along the offensive line? How do you fix what your offensive line looks like next season?
I think year over year, you're looking at trying to win on the margins. I think you let the first wave of offensive linemen get 25, $30 million. I think you let the first wave of offensive linemen get 60 over 4 years. And then what you do is you say, hey, who's this guy who, may have had an injury this past year, but besides that has a healthy resume? Who's this guy that, may have played 40% of snaps for a team because he was a backup, but I think you moneyball it. I think you look at the guys who are being overlooked. If you're really trying to revamp an offensive line, I think you look at the guys that are being overlooked and then you hammer the draft. You go sign a couple of guys that you think, he might he might pitch funny, but he can get strikeouts. You look at those guys and and then after that, you go to the draft and you try to just find where teams are missing. Like Creed Humphrey, there's no world where that guy should not be a first round pick. Like,
Yeah,
you go see where teams aren't putting in the value. And I think that's That's just where I think that's what you have to do as any team right now. And I think there are too many teams that are caught up mostly because of ownership in the idea that they have a crap ton of money and they have to spend it. And you don't have to spend it. You can there are better really if you want to spend it, go overpay guys on 1-year deals post June 1st. Like go do that to your owner or your G like go tell your owner, hey, this is how we're gonna spend our money, or go make trades like Washington does where they go acquire Debo Samuel to fill the gap of $40 million that they know they can't spend all of it. I think go out of your way to take as many swings on game breaker potential players as possible, and then on the offensive line, just moneyball it.
I think the interesting thing is that by having that money, right, the money that the Commanders didn't spend on offensive line, the money that the Bears have not spent on offensive line, and the Bears need to fix their offensive line. But the money that they didn't spend at those positions, they have tried to get game breakers, right? Like you're able to take on bigger contracts if you don't spend that money elsewhere. And likely get players for cheaper, right? Like Debo Samuel, I think went for a 5th round pick this offseason, or was it fifth, sixth, somewhere around that range.
Yeah.
Uh, I would argue he's worth a third. Like I think he's a good football player, even if he's
It's
maybe
just
trending towards the end of his career. But like the the Commanders are able to call the 49ers and go, we'll take on that contract. That contract isn't a concern to us because we're comfortable with where we can address the offensive line otherwise. And I think it is very much like you have to moneyball it outside of the draft. You
yeah,
got to
and you're
just find
comfortable.
guys
Yeah, and
who are good.
you're in a position where if you're the Commanders, you don't have to go take a home run swing that if it doesn't pan out is a bad contract. If Debo Samuel doesn't pan out, like I mean, this might just turn into me loving the Debo Samuel deal because I do already. But if Debo Samuel doesn't pan out, he's a 30-year-old free agent next offseason. You say, see ya, our 5th-round pick was never going to be anything anyway. Bye-bye, Debo Samuel. Hello, $17 million.
And you want to bet what they do this draft with that 1st round pick? I bet they spend it on an offensive lineman. I bet they
Yeah.
spend it on an offensive lineman who falls, or an offensive lineman who may not have the versatility, but may only be good, or like whatever that is. I bet you they spend it on offensive line this year because, again, like you can draft offensive linemen, and this is again where like the versatility matters, right? Like I think the reason why Will Campbell is going so high in the draft is because even if he fails at offensive tackle, and we're not going to spend this discussing Will Campbell in particular, but like reason why Will Campbell might go as early as like 4th in the draft to the New England Patriots is because he can fill a hole on your offensive line on a relatively cheaper contract and allow the Patriots, who desperately need a game breaker with Drake May, to find other ways to get that game breaker. Maybe
Yeah,
it's a
and they
trade
can.
for DK Metcalf. Maybe it's going out and signing Chris Godwin, who I think may not be a game breaker, but again, a very good player who can make plays for you. Like those guys, the only reason you're able to spend money on those guys who can win you games is because you don't spend a lot of money on the offensive line.
Yeah, and the best way to decipher whether or not your quarterback is a game breaker is by just getting guys in front of him who won't die. Like,
Yes.
just get guys in front of your quarterback who won't absolutely get crushed. Like, if you can just get 5 guys who are capable of playing football, you might not have an on schedule offense when it comes to your passing game because maybe you don't have an X receiver if you're the Patriots. But you will know those 3 or 4 times a month where Drake May extends the play, runs outside the pocket, and throws a 70-yard pass to 5'10" Demario Douglas. You'll know, hey, if we go make a swing at receiver, we believe in him. And that's where you can, it's so much easier to just let's get an offensive line that just will give us a high enough sample size to know what we have in front of us, not necessarily a high enough sample size where we might not be dedicating, $60 million to Bryce Young if I'm the Carolina Panthers, but we essentially are by saying if we're going to draft Bryce Young, we need to spend 60 to $70 million on just these 3 interior offensive line spots. You're not paying the quarterback, but you're also paying the quarterback. The money isn't going to him, but you are now entirely contingent on his success. And I understand they did that by trading, but also there's no need, especially in the NFL where so many quarterbacks are boom or bust, or you want to move on from guys that are in the middle tier. There's no reason to start your rebuild with anything more than just getting capable bodies out there.
And this is for anyone as we close this off who's going to try and sit here and say, we don't want your team to have good offensive linemen. That is absolutely false. We are like very much, both of us are very much proponents of build the trenches because an offensive line, Tyler, I don't know if you agree with this, may not win you a game, but they can certainly lose you a game. If your
Yeah.
quarterback is on his ass 10 times a game, you've lost the game. But if your quarterback is able to stay on schedule and get the ball to the guys who are getting paid the big money to make those plays, can win you a game. And so, like, again, like as you mentioned, I think the solution is to channel your inner Moneyball. We all watched that movie. We all know what they said about the first baseman who can't throw or whatever the new trend was, right? Like, go find the offensive lineman who may have struggled somewhere else, who just needs a change of scenery. Because
Yeah.
there are plenty of them who every year go out and just play good football and they're not going to get paid a lot of money. They're not going to get a lot of recognition, but they're the reasons why teams stay on schedule throughout games.
And in the modern NFL, where more kids are growing up playing receiver, playing quarterback, playing running back, we used to talk about guys like Saquon Barkley, like Derrick Henry, like Jamar Chase. We used to talk about these guys and say, these guys don't come available often, so you have to go get them. Tell me how many guys there are in the NFL that we say don't come around often. A ton. Now we have more of these guys who are good, who can break a game at wide receiver, at running back than ever. So it's not about the fact that you don't have to go take that swing on those players. You don't have to go overspend for those players. It's finding them when they come to you. AJ Brown came to the Eagles. Like it just happened. Like it was just like, hey, we have an opportunity to go get somebody who breaks a game because he happens to be available. Tyreek Hill is probably available this offseason at the right price. That's a game breaker. Now, if you're a team that has five average to above average offensive linemen and you take a swing on Tyreek Hill, like people will be calling it a bad trade for the Dolphins when in reality they need that money so they can shore up their offensive line and get five capable start. Like it's so clearly start with the trenches, move to being in a place where you can take your swings, but also just try to find value on the margins. It's what all the best teams are doing in multiple spots. You find the Eagles, we talked about their cap spending, the Commanders, their cap spending, the Commanders with their coaching, the fact that they got Cliff Kingsbury to be their OC, who was very much an on the margins win because the fact that if they hired an above average or they hired a highly touted brand new offensive coordinator, if Daniels has this season with anyone not named Cliff Kingsbury, their offensive coordinator's gone. And that's what it's about. It's about when you're building a team, if you want sustainability, which so many teams are not aiming for, and that's why the one team that has done it, the Chiefs, have won 3 Super Bowls. Sustainability just means winning on the margins and setting yourself up to take big swings when they find you.
And the other interesting part about this, and I'm glad you mentioned coaching as we sort of wind this down, is like I would divert that focus of like trying to get 5 incredibly gifted offensive linemen at high prices. I'd go out there and just get a kick-ass offensive line coach. I'd go out there and get a guy who is going to build those margins for you. And I look at a team like the Minnesota Vikings with Chris Cooper, who is a very good offensive line coach, who has made Blake Rendell look like a good offensive lineman, who has made other players look like solid offensive linemen. I look at teams like the Ravens and the Eagles, obviously. Like we don't need to keep talking about them, although I think they are kind of the case study to this. Look at the Broncos with Zach Strief, who like I think has done a great job in making that offensive line look capable. And I
And
think
that's
they
a
are.
team that spent crazy money on like Mike McGlinchey, but like if you look at the caliber of offensive linemen, maybe they're a little overpaid, but they've become a successful offense because they have 5 capable guys there.
And I think even interestingly enough, like you look at the Commanders, who I think a lot of people laughed at their offensive line coach hire because they went out and they hired Bobby Johnson. Bobby Johnson, famously of that 2023 New York Giants team, whose quarterback was on their ass on every single play. I think they gave up like the league high in sacks ever. But like, I think you look at it and like, I think he's another example of like, he's a good offensive line coach who was trying to coach an offensive line that was weak, that had a weak link. You can't fix an offensive line that has a weak link. Not even the greatest offensive line coach of all time can do that, because at some point the talent's going to win. But if you know what to look for your offensive line coach, you've suddenly fixed that problem. You've
If
found guys who fit what your offense is, what your game plan, what your vision is, and you can hyperfixate it and look at traits of guys like that. And like Mekhi Becton again is a guy who no one thought could play guard at a high level, but he went to a team that understood what he can be at guard and just found ways to minimize what he probably can't do at guard.
you want simplest terms on offensive line versus defensive line, you can choose where your defensive linemen play. You can't choose where your offensive linemen play. You can't take your left guard and move him to right guard and he'll be the same quality of guy. If you take Aaron Donald and you move, and if you're a team like the prime Rams and you know that you're going up against the greatest interior offensive line of all time, but one of the tackles is bad, you move
Just
Aaron
putting him
Donald
at
to the
left,
edge.
just putting it left end, and I'm going, all right,
Yeah.
man,
But
tee up.
if you're that team with an all-time great interior offensive line, but your tackles suck, you can't go move your interior guys to tackle and just expect it to be the same thing. Like it's really that simple, that the continuity of it all and the ability to just have guys who can gel together and there is no weak link is so much more important than having a guy that you think is a weapon on your offensive line.
And so as we close this out, the too long didn't read version of this, before we go off and figure out what the next conspiracy theory that we're going to attack is, uh, don't spend money on the first offensive guard that you see. Just don't do it. You don't have to do it. Use that money, take that money, and go get a guy who can help your offense stay on track, who can generate the big plays that football teams need to win. Because the truth is, right, like, I think maybe the moral of the story here is the offensive lineman doesn't win you a game, but it absolutely can lose you a game. And so finding that weak link and finding a way to attack that weak link is the most important thing. And maybe it's a little easier said than done. Maybe us in our bedrooms and our living rooms have all the answers to everything, because we don't have to be in a room with an owner, money hungry owner who wants, the offensive line, fix offensive line is like the entire MO. But like, I don't disagree with any of this.
Yeah.
Go spend the money on tackles, go spend the money on a wide receiver. Maybe don't spend the money on the first offensive guard that you see. And as free agency opens up next week, maybe let's not call these teams the winner of free agency before it starts. Tyler, anything else before we close off offensive line theory? Put a pin in this book.
Go if you are a coach of if you're a fan of a team that has a lot of money to spend, like Kevin said, don't go looking at the most expensive player at every position. I think the goal should be always win on the margins. And I think when you look at these teams that have these unsung heroes, the reason that they are unsung heroes is the fact that they were not the highest paid guy. And those are the guys that win Super Bowls. So you want to win, go win on the margins.
Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today on offensive line theory. I feel like with next episode, we need to have actual tinfoil hats made as we talk about this, because we are getting to the point now where we spent an hour talking about not spending money on the offensive line. And there will inevitably be someone on Twitter who goes, yeah, but I want offensive linemen. And we then have to explain this entire episode again. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me. This has been the tinfoil helmet. Follow us on social media and all the YouTubes. Those will be in the link, the description of this, I think, is what we call these things nowadays. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you soon.